So listen, all corals are not created equal. Some of them are going to demand almost constant attention, but there are some out there that seem to almost thrive on pure neglect. And in this video today, I'm going to give you my top 8 corals for beginners, or even for those of us who might be a little bit lazy as reef keepers. Let's talk about it. Also, more towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you a pro tip that's going to help guarantee your success when you are choosing your corals at the fish store for when you get them home. So make sure you stick around for that. But up first, my first pick for easy to care for corals are going to be the zoanthids. Zoas are great corals for beginners and lazy reef keepers because as long as the tank has a relative amount of stability, these things are just going to grow. Now, you need to be doing a little bit of research on the individual ones that you find because some of them are going to grow slower and be a little harder to take care of than other ones. Stratosphere zoas, for example, grow really, really slow, but they look amazing once you're able to get a colony of them. But if you get them as a beginner, you're not going to see very much happen very quickly in the tank. So start doing some research on which zoas are the fast growing ones and target those specifically. These things are awesome because they are super hardy in most cases. They are well adaptable to a lot of different lighting situations. As long as you have a decent spectrum and enough par in your tank, 100 upwards to about 350, the zoas are going to do just fine. They don't really have a lot of requirements. They don't require spot feeding at all. As long as your nitrates and phosphates are where they need to be, these guys are going to be just happy doing all of their growth from the photosynthesis that's going to occur from your lights. And one of my favorite things about these is they grow in sort of a mat type of structure and they cover a lot of area, but they don't completely blanket the rock with their own mat like something like GSP does. So this prevents the situation where you have dead zones underneath this mat. These guys grow in little strings with little heads popping off of them, and they just look really good when they're covering the rocks. And you can have multiple species that are going to touch each other, multiple color morphs and things. They're going to touch each other. It's going to be just fine. Sometimes they'll even intertwine themselves, and you'll have different colors that are interspersed within each other, and it just looks really awesome. Another awesome benefit of these is if you want to get into fragging, or if yours outgrow the rock and they're kind of spreading too far, they're very easy to frag. You go in there with some scissors and you just snip the little connective tissue, break it off the rock, whatever, and you have a frag of zoas. One thing that I would caution you about here, though, is be careful and make sure you understand the differences between zoas and pallies. Now, all polyp corals have the potential to contain palitoxin within them. The actual zoas seem to have a lot less than most of the pallies do, but without lab grade analysis, there's no way to know which ones are going to have more potent toxins or anything like that. But generally speaking, actual zoanthids, not pallies, are usually pretty safe. But you still want to wear your PPE when you're working with these things. So a good pair of glasses, a mouth covering or a mask to go over your face, and some, nitrile dust-free latex gloves are going to be all that you need to protect yourself just in case one of them decides to get a little bit spicy. But I've never had any trouble out of actual zoas. Now, pallies, on the other hand, I have had plenty of those that have contained quite a bit of palitoxin, and I've even had it, just a little taste of it myself, and it's not a good time. So make sure you're doing your research and the colorations so that you know which one you're looking at when you're at the store. I should also mention that these are in not any particular order. These are just my top 8. So number 2 on the list are mushrooms, the Rickordia, Discosoma, and Redactus mushrooms. These things, you could almost grow saltwater mushrooms in a saltwater mud hole. Okay, they really do tolerate a huge range of parameters and also a huge range of lighting. Back in the day, 20 years ago, if you went to a really good fish store and you set up your saltwater aquarium and they were working with you to get you set up with your tank, one of the first corals that they were going to allow you to buy, that's a topic for another video. Yes, back in the day, some really good fish stores wouldn't just sell you anything you wanted. It's a little different these days, but maybe I'll make a video on that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been to a fish store who told you no. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. But anyway, the mushroom corals were some of the very first ones that the more expensive reef keepers would recommend because they're so easy to care for. They really don't care about much, if anything at all. As long as your tank is salty and things are in the right ranges, the mushroom corals are going to grow and they're going to be just fine. And some of them are absolutely stunningly beautiful. And we're even getting some really awesome color morphs. Now we're getting into bounce mushrooms and things like that, but these can be several $100s and are not the ones that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the more cheaper mushrooms, the ones you can pick up for 10, 15, 20 bucks for one or two on a frag plug. And, they look pretty good in the tank and they like to fill in shaded areas very well. But the one thing that I would say about mushroom corals is once they're in there, they're pretty much in there. I have seen tanks that have been overtaken by mushroom corals, but they're pretty easy to get in there and loosen them from the rock and pop them off. It just might take a little bit of maintenance on your part every now and then, once a year, to get that done. Now, some of these, depending on your flow and your lighting and whatnot, can get pretty big. I've seen mushroom corals that were out to 5 or 6 inches around, which is pretty doggone large. And look, let me tell you, when you have a couple different colors, you can get blue ones and red ones and orange ones and yellow ones and green ones and stuff like that. When you have them all in a tank and they're all grown out and they're interspersed amongst each other, the tank looks great. You could have just a mushroom tank and it be an awesome looking reef. Anyone who's not a reef keeper is going to come in and they're going to be absolutely astonished at the colors and the corals that you have in your aquarium. So, food for thought on the mushrooms. They're awesome. By the way, I have an important announcement to make. As of today, I am officially a full-time content creator and mentor in the saltwater aquarium space. This is now my career. It's what I'm going to be doing going forward, teaching you guys, and I hope that I'll be able to see you guys, maybe even speaking at some of the reef shows coming up in 2026. That's full-time work, but it definitely hasn't hit full-time pay yet. Whew. Now, the next one on the list is going to give you a little bit of movement in the aquarium, but it's not really my favorite because it's just not super gorgeous of a color, from a color standpoint, but it's an amazing looking coral, and that is the Kenya tree. They come in a couple of different sort of palish purple to whitey brown sort of colorations, and they're going to move with the flow in the aquarium and look very good. They're super easy to care for. Like mushrooms, they really don't care much about the water parameters as long as they are stable. And that seems to be the key with these guys. If things are moving around too much, these are going to get unhappy. They're going to close up a little bit and seem like they're withering away. But this makes them an excellent indicator coral for you to have in your aquarium as a visual indication that things might not be just how they should be. So you can start looking into it and figure out what exactly is going on in your aquarium. So these are great for that. But you do need to know that these can have, sometimes they'll just close up and they'll almost look like they're shedding. That doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. It just means they're going through a growth phase and they'll come out of it in a few days to a week or something like that. So just every time they're closed up a little bit, don't freak out and start making changes to the tank. Test your tank, take a look at it, make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And if it is, just give them some time and they'll be all right. This particular coral can self-propagate, which all of the ones I've mentioned can, but this one self-propagates by breaking off a little piece of itself and dropping it in your aquarium. The flow will take it somewhere else. It'll anchor down in a hole in a rock, and once it's good and stuck down there, then it comes out and becomes a new colony of Kenya tree coral. The problem with this is they can take over a tank if you're not careful. So if you see one that's got a branch that's about to fall off, go ahead and snip it and take it out of the aquarium. That way it doesn't pop up somewhere else. Number 4 on the list is going to be Xenia, and I really like the pulsing Xenia variety. I think they add an awesome looking movement to the tank that you really can't get out of any other corals. These also come in some pale whites to purples to pinks and browns, and they add a lot of attractiveness and flow and movement to the tank. Much like the Kenya tree, these can take over a tank if they're left to their own devices, and they probably are, because Xenia, where they break off, like a Kenya tree will break off like a big piece of a branch or something, Xenia will drop a single little head and it'll flow off somewhere and go into a crack or a crevice that would you can't see it. And then, 5, 6 months from now, you look on the back of your rock and there's a little colony of pulsing Xenia back there doing this kind of thing, right? They are voracious spreading corals. And if you put them in your tank, they probably will take over. But they are still an awesome coral to start with and give you some confidence as a reef keeper that you're going to be able to move forward and do this. And a lot of people like to say that if you keep them on an isolated rock in your aquarium, that they won't spread or go anywhere else. And that's just not correct information. These guys are going to go where the heck they want to go because they use the flow of the tank to take them there. Now, much like the Kenya tree corals, these are also an excellent indicator coral because if anything is majorly wrong, they're going to close up and get really pissed off, but they can tolerate it, so they generally won't die. When you see this, it's an indication that something's going on with your tank. Now, both of the ones that I just mentioned, the Kenya tree and the Xenia, and really all corals can do this to some degree. When you put them into your tank, they might get super pissed off for, a few hours to a couple of days. That's not the time that I'm talking about using them as an indicator. They need to go through that process, and once they have become acclimated to the tank and they're big and fluffy, then something goes wrong. That's what I'm talking about. Next up on the list, number 5, are the leather corals, and there's a bunch of different kinds that you can choose from, like toadstools and devil's hands and cabbage leathers, which are super awesome looking. They add some movement to the aquarium, and they're very nice to have. They come in a wide range of colors, and they are generally pretty tolerant of parameter swings and things being a little bit wonky, which makes them great for a beginning or even a lazy reef keeper. They're going to provide some structure to the aquarium more than just the rocks. I mean, cabbage leathers and waving hands and stuff, or devil's hands, they can get pretty big, And you might even find sometimes that clownfish might take to these corals as a host, and it's kind of a cool thing to watch when the clownfish is within there just moving around and whatnot. But I would caution you here. Leather corals do contain a toxin that is not going to hurt your fish or me or you or anything else, but it is used by those corals to suppress the other corals around it so that the leather can grow and get big. And believe me, some of them can get absolutely huge. There's a store near me down here in New Orleans, Louisiana, called Coral Connection, and they have a toadstool coral that, I am not kidding, has to be 3 or 4 feet across. It's massive. It's been in that tank for probably 15, 20, or maybe even more years, but it has pretty much killed all of the other corals around it in most of the tank. So if you're going to be keeping leather corals in your aquarium, I would highly recommend that you run some activated carbon in the tank to absorb any potential toxins that are released by those leathers. I recommend running the ROX type of activated carbon if you're going to do that, and that probably needs a video all on its own. It's ROX, and then there's a measurement. It's 0.8. That's the stuff that you want to get. It's sold in all kinds of places, that you can find online. That stuff is going to absorb those toxins and make sure that the other corals in your aquarium are not affected by those toxins from the leathers. Now, like the Kenya tree, these also will close up their polyps and shed like a waxy looking layer of skin, much like a reptile. This is completely normal for leather corals. So when you get it into your tank, it's been a week or 2 or 3, you see your leather coral, your toadstool, whatever, close up and retract all of its polyps and get really waxy looking on the surface. This is totally normal. It's going to go through this, it's going to shed that layer, and it's going to come back bigger and beautifuler than it was before. Number 6, and probably one of my favorites on this list, are the Duncan corals. These things are really awesome. Now, they don't come in that many different colors. It's pretty much a green to a green-blue spectrum for the Duncan corals. but they look great. They almost look like a small anemone with their little tentacles coming out and everything, and they're pretty easy to care for. This is an introduction into the LPS corals, the large polyp stonies. They are going to have a skeleton base on these guys, and you have to pay a little bit more attention to the water parameters to make sure that your calcium, alkalinity, magnesium are where they're supposed to be. But generally speaking, they're not that difficult to take care of, and most of the time they do well in fairly newly tanks with very little attention. Although occasional feeding they do seem to like, things like mysis shrimps and brine shrimps, and it's super awesome to watch them go through that feeding process too. Now, once you get a Duncan coral to the point where it has, more than a few heads, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 heads, they usually grow and put on new heads pretty fast. It's not that uncommon to see a Duncan coral grow from 2 or 3 to 12 or 15 heads over the course of a year. And they are an awesome looking coral once they're about the size of a volleyball or something like that with a couple of dozen heads. They look absolutely amazing. These are definitely going to be the ones that I would recommend for any beginners or even lazy reef keepers to get into the keeping of the LPS corals without too much fuss. Number 7 on the list is going to be the trumpet coral. Some people call them candy cane corals, and this is a branching LPS that's going to grow a little further and a little faster than a Duncan coral, but because of that, you may start to experience some fluctuations in parameters. So it's going to ramp it up just a little bit for you, but you're probably not going to have to worry about dosing or anything like that until you have a tank full of corals. Now, these are very adaptable to a lot of different lighting situations and flow situations and even parameter ones. So they're great for that getting into the LPS type of scenario with a new tank, or somebody who is maybe just doesn't have the ability to put their hands on the tank testing and stuff every single day. This is going to be an awesome option. They come in a few different colors, in the green and blue, and even there's a couple of them that are like really neon highlighter green. They look crazy in the tank, like some alien tree from somewhere. And they do grow pretty fast. And just like the Duncan corals, you can feed these guys and help them produce even a little bit more. You can spot feed each one of the heads and things like this, and they do pretty well. When you have one that's actually really healthy and thriving and doing great, at nighttime, they will expand their feeders out, and you can take a look at that. It's awesome to take pictures of that kind of stuff. So these are a great coral just all around for just about anybody who wants to have them in their tank. And now we're going to go to number 8, the clove polyp corals. And I don't mean little blue cloves that you see all over the tank in the fish store. Those are the wrong ones. You don't want those. If that store has those little tiny blue or purple clove, look like little blue flowers all over their tank, do not buy anything from that tank. You picking up what I'm putting down? Those are invasive blue clove polyps, and you do not want them in your aquarium. They're a pain in the butt to get rid of, and I didn't even intend on talking about these in this video today, but sometimes you just get a little bit extra from me. If that was something you didn't know about and you're glad that you know now, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you can catch these tips when they just randomly come out of my crazy brain. Now, back to the regular clove polyps. I'm talking about the different colors of the firework cloves and the other things like this. These look awesome, and they're amazing to take macro photography of once you get into that side of the hobby, which is a whole hobby all on its own. But they add a lot of movement to the aquarium. They're going to flip and flow with the water changes in the tank, and not the water changes, the water flow adjustments in the tank. They're just going to be moving all around. They let the water take the flow where it needs to go, and they look great when they're doing it. They come in a bunch of different colors, usually pretty similar, but some have a neon stripe through the middle, and some are more orange and some are more yellow. They grow in a similar way to zoas, where they'll have stringers that run along, and then the clove polyp stalks will come out of those stringers. So they don't mat over the rocks. They just kind of coexist in the rocks. So what happens a lot of the time is they will intermingle with other corals, and you'll have zoanthids growing within them, or sometimes pallies if you have those, or maybe even a mushroom coral here or there. And it looks great because it adds that depth into the aquarium. It's not like you just have a coral here and one here. You have this thing growing amongst all the other things, and it just looks freaking awesome. They don't grow crazy fast, but they're easier to keep, in my opinion, than something like GSP or green star polyps. GSP will close up just because a bee farted in Thailand last Tuesday. There's no reason for it sometimes. But the firework cloves, as long as things are good and stable in the tank, these guys are going to be out doing their thing. And really, even though they can move and they can spread through the tank, they're very easy to control because of that little runner situation. You just go in there with some scissors, snip the runner, peel off the ones that you don't want running anywhere, throw them in the frag tank, throw them in the junk tank, which is an awesome idea that I'm going to be making a whole video on that coming soon. So be sure you stick around, or make sure you have notifications on so you catch my junk tank idea when it happens. Basically, it's a tank where you just throw all the crap that you don't want in your display. You just throw it in there and let nature do its thing. It's awesome when they're 4 or 5 years old and they look great and there's just all kinds of crazy stuff in there. It's kind of cool. But anyway, I digress. Right at the beginning of the video, I told you I was going to give you a pro tip for picking corals when you go into the fish store or wherever you're looking at picking up your corals. And here it is. Try to avoid coral frags that are very small or only have 1 or 2 polyp heads on them. These have a much lower success rate when they're moved into your tank than a coral that has 10 or 15 or 20 heads on it. Now, that's cost prohibitive sometimes with some things, but especially something like a Duncan. If you can get one that has 3 or 4 heads rather than one that has 1 head that looks like it was just fragged yesterday, you're going to have more success with that larger coral that has more polyps on it rather than one that just has a single. And the same way, especially with zoanthid corals, because single polyps with a zoanthid, they'll just melt sometimes and they'll wither away, they'll die, and then your zoa is gone. So if you're going to be buying zoanthids, look for frag plugs that have been in the store for a while. Even if they're not the most beautiful thing in the store, opt for the one that has more heads rather than just 1 single polyp. That's another thing. We really need to get rid of this head term in the hobby. These are polyps, and I'm going to try to do better with that. But anyway, my point is to get bigger coral colonies. Even though the one you want might be there, if it's a little 1/4-inch nub of something, it's not going to do as well for you as if you got a big 2-inch tall piece. Even if you have to pay double or triple the price for it, it's often worth it to do so because of the success rate of those larger pieces of coral. So that's going to be it. There's a video on the screen right now. Take a look at that one because I think you're going to find that very interesting. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, you can do so by becoming a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button or the link in the description. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to catch you over there.